Wendy so much for your introduction. Can everyone hear me? Is this okay? Yeah. Okay. And thank you for the opportunity to discuss your career in celebration of this incredible milestone. Before I met Wendy as a newcomer to Hamilton, I tried my hand at the HJN questionnaire, how well do you know Hamilton Jewish history?
That was in the,
I think it was November.
Okay, a couple of issues ago, yeah.
Okay, so
it was a quiz.
Yes, and this was before I met you. And honestly, the hubris of thinking that I could answer any of these questions quickly gave way to awe. Awe at the incredible detail and research that went into designing a questionnaire showcasing the knowledge that is coming from this community. So it goes without saying that my curiosity was piqued, and I really wanted to learn more. So, Wendy, you have a background in Jewish studies. You have been a Jewish educator for years. Did you ever think that you were going to end up in journalism, and how did you get your start in working for the Hamilton Jewish News?
Great question. Everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, so many of you probably, well, many of you don't know. I grew up in Hamilton, and I went away to university and ended up at McGill, where I majored in Jewish studies and went into Jewish education. And after my eldest daughter, Hillary, was born, 1983, circumstances brought Lori and I back to Hamilton, where I went right away to the Jewish day school in town, which was the Hamilton Hebrew Academy, the only Jewish day school, to see if I could get a job since I was working at a Jewish day school in Montreal. And I did work at the Hamilton Hebrew Academy for a number of years, and then I started to have babies and stopped working there. Worked at Beth Jacob Hebrew School for a while, but I was a very active member of a Jewish women's group at the time, Naamatz, and I had a friend in that group, Trish Eppel, who was the editor of the Hamilton Jewish News. And I remember going to Trish's house for Naamat meetings and seeing the paper and reading it and thinking, that's kind of a cool job. And one day I had to go to Trish's house to pick up a flyer for the Naamat author luncheon that she was designing. And I met Trish at her house. We went down to her basement, and she sat down at her Mac computer, and she made this flyer right in front of my eyes. And I said to her, oh my God, I want your job. Because I just thought it was the coolest thing. She was the editor of the Hamilton Jewish News. She was designing flyers for Naamat. She had this very cool computer. And I said, if you ever don't want to do what you do one day, will you please promise me you'll call? She said, sure. Like a month or two later, literally, I got the call. Trish was applying for the position of executive director of the Hamilton Jewish Federation. She said, do you still want the job? And I went, oh my God, yes. So I applied. At the time, I applied with Julia Colick, who was an actual journalist, because I felt sure I was totally unqualified for this job. Julia was a journalist, and I knew nothing about Mac computers. But I bought myself a computer, I got myself a computer guru, and I learned on the job. Within a year, Julia and I parted ways, and I've been doing the paper since, and that was October 1993 was my first issue. So it's actually 29 years, and Trish was actually the one who ended up calling the newspaper the Hamilton Jewish News. That's why we're here tonight, because before that, it was called the Federation News, and before that, it was called the CJO News, the Council of Jewish Organizations. And Trish was the one in 1980 something, I can't do math, so it's 36 years ago, convinced the Federation Board at the time to change the name of the paper to the Hamilton Jewish News. And apparently she got pushback for that, because it's a Federation-funded paper, and it was considered a Federation vehicle, and why would you call it the Hamilton Jewish News? But Trish must have had a vision that, no, this is not just Federation News, this is the community. and really push for the name change. And so I feel like I walk in her footsteps.
It's incredible. So Trish is where we start.
Yeah.
But who else would you say have been your mentors in this experience?
Thank you for that question. So literally I knew nothing, and over the years, you learn on the job, but I did have some very important mentors early on, and I have to mention Aviva Boxer, who is the editor of the Go section of the Hamilton Spectator to this day, and her husband Wade Hemsworth. Wade was a journalist, an incredible journalist at the Hamilton Spec. Now he works at McMaster by Chris. And Wade and Aviva agreed to be on an advisory board for me. And over the years, other people have joined that advisory board, like my friend Celia Rothenberg and Phyllis Schrag. But Wade and Aviva were real mentors. And for many, many years, Aviva would proofread my paper. Yeah. And she would really proofread it with a fine-tooth comb and also give me feedback. And I think one of the most important changes in the paper over the years happened when Aviva really pushed to get the Federation News off the front page. Because she said, people see these pictures of people who maybe are active in the organization, but not necessarily people that everybody knows, and they see this organizational stuff, and not necessarily motivated to turn the page and read the paper. So Aviva really pushed for getting those human interest stories on the front page. And I think that made a huge difference. Another person I really feel like I need to mention at this point is a very good friend of mine who is not able to be here tonight. His name is John Bullock. John he's the art director. I don't know if you guys noticed, but about 4 years ago, I just looked it up today online. I think it was the September 2018 issue. The whole front page, the whole design of the paper completely changed. And John was somebody I knew for years, but he worked at The Spectator. He also worked freelance for other publications. And one day Aviva was printing out a page for me to proof at the Hamilton Spectator. John happened to walk by and looked at this printout. I went, oh yeah, Wendy. Oh yeah, that's her paper. Oh, I think she needs some help. Meaning like design help. And from that moment on, he started to work with me like literally pro bono. I'm his volunteer job. And since then, that paper and the way it looks and the layout and the design is really him. And so I have to say, this paper would not be what it is without his help. That's John Bullock. I'm sure there's more, but go ahead, keep asking. Yeah.
So something that I'm really curious about as a newcomer is, for the 29 years of the 36 years running for this newspaper, what have you observed in this period to be the most significant change in the Hamilton Jewish community? And maybe we should pick one thing. I mean, there's probably a lot, but,
I mean, so when I was growing up in this community, it was very synagogue-centric. You belonged to a shul, and that's kind of how you were labeled. And then I moved back here in '83, and it was sort of like that still. Over the years, I think, there's been much more, I mean, even at that point, when it was synagogue-centric, it was kind of a fragmented community. People tended to only know the people that they were affiliated with. But over the years, I think people don't affiliate nearly as much anymore. And I think that there's a lot of people in our community that we don't know about. And so I'm gonna say fragmentation has increased over the years. And then lately, I think a little bit of disconnection, especially since COVID kind of put everything to a halt. And also the arrival of another Jewish day school. We had, when I first moved here, we had one Jewish day school, and kind of everyone's kid went there. And then over the years, there was another Jewish day school, and then people were kind of split. So I guess I'm gonna say increased fragmentation. But another change that I've seen more recently, which I think is very positive, is the role of federation. And I have to give Gustavo credit for this, because I think that since Gustavo started in 2017, you said?
No, you're going soon.
Yeah, seems like you've been here forever. I think that federation is seen in a much more positive light and as a unifier. And I think that federation and the Hamilton Jewish News share the same role in this community, and that's to bring people together, to acknowledge, people may not know each other because they belong to different synagogues, or maybe, or they're not affiliated and they don't know anything about the community, but all they have to do is get themselves a copy of the paper, and they're gonna read about people from all walks of life in the community, like Gustavo said, the diversity of our community, the richness of it. And I think that people see federation in that light too, as of late. So I think that's a positive change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's certainly how I came to know everyone here as well.
Yeah.
Recently, you have broadened Hamilton Jewish News to also include podcasting, right? So what has that experience been like for you to transition to this completely different medium?
So I have to acknowledge a person in the room tonight. So Ben Gould, the Gould brothers, Ben and Mark are big sponsors of the Hamilton Jewish News over the last few years, and have been extraordinarily generous. And we got this incredible grant from Ben and Mark, and we sat down with them, and Ben just said, Wendy, you need to really go digital, because you need to think about A, succession, and B, the next generation, and bringing in the young people. And at the time, we were digital in the sense that we had a website, and all of our articles were going online for every issue. But he had a bigger vision, and I said, oh, what does that mean, go digital? Oh, podcasting. And the original idea was to bring in a young person to do the podcasting, to bring in young people. So we hired a young woman from Toronto, and she did an episode. And I wasn't satisfied. Me being me, I felt like I know the people, I want to know more, I know who to talk to, and I know the background and I know the history. So I kind of, as is my want, I just took over. And I fell in love with podcasting because I don't love writing, believe it or not. Like, I find writing is really hard. And podcasting is so easy, all you have to do is talk. So it's been really a gift, and loving it, and it's just a whole new aspect that I've embraced, and I know I'm supposed to step back, but it's been really hard. Sorry.
So, in thinking about your commitment to this newspaper and your commitment to the podcast, you are certainly a collector of stories. That's how I would describe you, is that you're a storyteller, but you're collecting stories. And I'm wondering if you could share with us your best story from over the past few years, and even explain to us why this particular story has stayed with you.
Okay, well.
If you can pick one, I mean.
Well, of course I'm gonna pick the one. Your husband is sitting in the room. Chris Long, he was my best story, and that's how I got to meet him and I got to meet you. So that's another perk of this job, is I get to meet incredible people. So I don't know how many of you remember this front page story an issue or two ago was Canadian Jewish journalist Mati Friedman, Canadian Israeli journalist Mati Friedman, writes a book about Leonard Cohen and the Sinai during the Yom Kippur War. And I'm reading a Times of Israel article about it, and I see suddenly that he found this obscure Leonard Cohen manuscript in a box in Hamilton, Ontario. I went, what? And I right away looked up Mati Friedman, emailed his publicist or whatever, and said, I'm the editor of the Hamilton Jewish News. Like, you would not believe what an in that is. I can say that to anybody. And they think like a big deal. And I'm not gonna tell him it's not. So, like I said, like, where's this box in Hamilton, Ontario? And he says, oh, Chris Long at McMaster University. Look him up. So I look up this guy, Chris Long. Anyway, I reach out to Chris. We have a Zoom call. I'm telling you, it was love at first sight. By the end of the Zoom call, like, we paused the official interview, and I kept talking to him for like another 30 minutes, and ended up inviting him and Emily over, and that's how I got to know Emily. Chris was the one who discovered the Leonard Cohen manuscript, because Monty Friedman called him and said, by the way, there's a manuscript, I believe, at McMaster, and Chris is first, not called him, he emailed him, and Chris says, I think you must be mistaken, but ended up finding it. And so that was the story. That was a great story. So for that story, I got to interview and meet Chris, and this front page, like, it's a big international story, this Leonard Cohen manuscript at McMaster. And that this McMaster archivist was the one who found it. And then Monty Friedman mentioned it in his book. Then I got to interview Monty Friedman. So I'm gonna say that's a story that stayed with me. But when you showed me what your questions were gonna be tonight, and I thought about what's the stories, to me, it's not so much the end product, but the interviews I got to do. So I'm just gonna mention 2 interviews which were a highlight for me over my career. One of them was with the late Ehud Manor, who was one of Israel's most popular and beloved songwriters. And I just had found, I was in Israel in 2003 on a mission, and I was in an audience of Americans, and Ehud Manor, who pretty much wrote the popular Israeli songbook. Like any song by Mati Kaspi, if you know him, was written by Ehud Manor back in the day, in the 70s. And Ehud Manor is the entertainment at this big fancy event for Americans in Israel. And I'm saying to myself, oh my God, I need to interview this man. And I went up to him that night and said, I'm with the Hamilton Jewish News. Can I have an interview? And he said yes. And I met him the next day at the Hilton Hotel in Tel Aviv, and I got an interview with Ehud Manor. Now that was the thrill of a lifetime. When I eventually wrote it up, probably the people in Hamilton who were reading the paper, had no idea who he was. And how do you get across who this man is? But just the fact that I got to meet him and interview him was a thrill. And more recently, another thrill of mine was interviewing Cantor Gidon Zellermeyer of Montreal Shar Shemayim, who was Leonard Cohen's spiritual mentor, and Boris Bratz. So it was after Boris Bratz passed away. And again, I happened to be on YouTube one day and was watching Cantor Zellermeyer did a whole Boris Bratz tribute. And I knew that he was the same Cantor Zellermeyer that performed You Want It Darker on Leonard Cohen's last album. It's beautiful. He's that beautiful voice, like, so I knew who he was. So I'm watching his Boris Bratz tribute on YouTube. And then, I don't know, the next day I happened to speak to Rabbi Green, who, I don't know, I somehow mentioned the tribute, and Rabbi Green says, oh, yeah, I know him. He came and performed in Hamilton when the Addis did their cantorial concert, whenever that was, a number of years ago. And I went, oh my God, do you have Cantor Zellermeyer's email address? Sure. Gives it to me. Next thing you know, I'm emailing, hi, I'm with the Hamilton Jewish News.
Wendy.
Can I have an interview? Can we do a podcast episode? He says, sure. So, like, that was a thrill, and because he was incredible. And we talked about, not only did we talk about Boris, but we talked about Leonard Cohen. And he connected the two. So those are 2 standout people that I've interviewed. So it was a real thrill. Yeah.
Well, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
This was really great.
Yeah.
Yeah, just thank you so much again for sharing with us all of these stories and for continuing the incredible work that you're doing.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you,
Thank
Wendy.
you so much.